Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Horror Mine. My name is Vikshai, and this is the Scare Score, where I break down horror movies and rate them on how scary I think they are. In this episode, I'm going over the 2004 Thai supernatural horror film, Shudder. The film tells the story of a photographer and his girlfriend being haunted by the spirit of a woman after a hit and run. I'll be breaking down the events that take place throughout the film, while our scare score percentage goes up or down based on how effective the scares are or attempt to be. Shudder is considered a classic Thai horror film and one of the scariest Asian horror films of the early 2000s. But how scary is it? Sit back and relax and join me as we explore Shudder and tally up the Scare Score. Our movie begins with some pretty eerie opening credits letting us know that this film involves photography. We then meet our main character Ton and his girlfriend Jane having drinks at his friend's wedding named Ton. They are accompanied by two other friends, Jim and some dude whose name we never actually find out. On the drive home, Ton and Jane realize they're in a horror movie, which means they aren't allowed to keep their eyes on the road. Hey, you see that neat little road in front of you?
Look at it! Look at it! Look at it! Look at it!
A concerned Jane tries to get out of the car to check on the woman they hit, but Ton yells at her to drive off. 5 minutes in, and our main characters are already making poor decisions. Ton is a photographer and during a college graduation photo shoot briefly catches the spirit of the woman they hit. Jane feels very guilty about the hit and run and Ton tries to brush it off, showing he doesn't have the cleanest conscience. He picks up his prints from a copy shop and notices a strange white glare in all of his photos. Jane goes to Ton's apartment and sees something moving inside the dark room. The doorknob begins rattling violently until the door opens on its own. The creepy atmosphere is set up quite nicely here, as the dark room is the perfect setting for a good scare. She goes to turn off the sink and sees long black hair emerging from the water. This was a pretty decent scare that I just realized The Grudge 2 took heavy inspiration from. Jane wakes up terrified but realizes it was just a nightmare. They see what appears to be the spirit of a woman in one of the photos and wonder if the woman they hit may have died. They return to the scene of the accident where a worker tells them that no pedestrian was reported struck at the location. What a great idea! Let's go ask about a hit and run with our car that has the front bumper smashed in. Ton processes the photo, which clearly reveals the face of a woman, which leads to a pretty effective jump scare. Jane comes into the dark room, but when Ton receives a call from her, he realizes it was something else standing behind him. Jane comes across a magazine about real ghost photographs and they decide to speak to the publisher. During the car ride, Ton mentions he's been feeling neck pain ever since the accident. They meet the editor and realize the ghost pictures in the magazines are fake. The boss tells them that while most of the photos are fakes, there are some that are unexplainable. He shows them one of his baby pictures that he believes captured the spirit of his late mother. He says that spirits often follow their loved ones or those that wronged them in their lifetime. This is an effectively creepy scene that shows us some pretty eerie ghostly photos, which is what this movie advertised.
คนที่ตายไปแล้วทำไมยังต้องกลับไป
He ends by saying that the photos themselves may reveal what the spirits truly want. During a photo shoot, the lights suddenly go out and Ton is being stalked by the spirit of the dead woman. She briefly appears as his camera flashes, which leads to a fairly predictable jump scare. Ton goes to the doctor's office and, just like me, appears pretty concerned when he steps on the scale. He says that his neck pain has gotten worse, but the doctor says his x-rays look normal. He prescribes him some pain medicine and shoos him out of the office. He goes to pick up his meds, but the lady at the counter starts calling him a lying bastard, which scares him off. He visits Jane in class and finds her sitting alone in the classroom. She turns around with blood in her eyes and begins throwing up blood. As with most horror scares in the first half of a movie, it was just a nightmare. He wakes up to his friend Ton inside of his apartment, who says he's going to die. He begins to freak out and asks Ton where he hid the photos. Ton then sees something that frightens him and leaves the apartment. Ton begins to look for something, but when Jane walks in, he says he's just cleaning up. Jane takes another look at the photos and notices that the white shadows seem to be focusing on a specific spot on the building. She visits the college and goes into the science classroom that corresponds with the white shadow. She begins taking photos with a Polaroid and sees the ghostly figure of the woman in one of the photos. We then hear a very loud scream that caught me pretty off guard, and a picture frame falls off the wall. She recognizes the woman in the photo as the one she struck on the road. Though Jane was the one who struck her and drove off, it seems that the woman's spirit is leaving her clues as opposed to maliciously haunting her. Jane goes through Tun's yearbook and discovers pictures of him with the woman. Tun goes to Ton's apartment and witnesses him jumping to his death from his balcony. They learn from Ton's wife that their other two friends have also taken their own lives. Knowing that she is somehow involved, Jane asks him about the woman in the picture. Tun says that he knew her in college, and because we're still in a horror movie, she was the quiet girl who didn't have any friends. Tun says he felt sorry for her and the two began dating secretly as he didn't want his friends to find out. Nit seemed like a great girlfriend. She clearly loved Tun and even bought him a brand new camera. Tun, on the other hand, was a pretty terrible partner. Not only did he keep their relationship a secret because he was ashamed of her, but he even laughed at his own girlfriend with his friends. Tun eventually broke up with Nit and she tried to slice her own wrists as a result. This is a very tragic and disturbing scene which makes Nit a very sympathetic character. The scene of Nit screaming was what Jane saw when she encountered her in the dark room earlier. Tun has been a pretty unlikable character from the beginning, and trust me, it gets worse. We get a pretty funny scene where Tun goes into a public restroom and runs out of toilet paper. He asks the person in the next stall for a roll and gets spooked when he sees a woman's hand. Come on, Tun. It's Thailand. Tun and Jane decide to drive out into the countryside to visit Nate's home. During the drive, Tun sees Nate getting up from the middle of the road and speeds off. Her spirit appears right behind Jane, and Tun somehow thinks he can escape a ghost by driving over 100 miles per hour. While asking for directions, Tun notices a young monk staring at him. They arrive at Nate's house and are shocked when her mother tells them that she is upstairs taking a nap. They head upstairs and discover Nate's rotting corpse neatly tucked into bed. We learn that after breaking up with Tun, Nate returned home and was a different person. She refused to talk to anyone and attempted to overdose on pills. When she got to the hospital, she took her own life by jumping off the rooftop. Nate's mother was very distraught from losing her daughter and refused to hold a funeral and cremate her. This shows that Nate died before the crash and that Jane actually ran over her spirit. Her spirit is not at rest and even torments Tun at her own funeral. Tun and Jane spend the night at a hotel where Tun looks just a little too comfortable underneath that blanket. Something slowly pulls the blanket off of him and Nit appears at the end of the bed. I'm telling you, these Asian ghosts do not care about blankets.
You have no power here.
She slowly crawls on top of the bed but disappears when he tries waking up Jane. He runs out of the room and Nit begins chasing after him. This is a very intense scene and her ghost looks terrifying walking on the ceiling like that. He tries to run downstairs but soon realizes that he keeps ending up on the 4th floor. He sees Jane in the stairwell who starts repeatedly asking why he left her. She grabs onto his face revealing her slit wrists and turns into Nit, who is clearly resentful that he broke up with her. He tries to escape by climbing down a ladder on the side of the building. Nit appears directly above him and continues chasing after him in a truly terrifying scene. She briefly disappears and reappears right in front of him, which causes him to let go and fall off the ladder. This was such a well-made scare scene. First of all, Nit already looks pretty scary. Her walking upside down on the ceiling made her absolutely terrifying. Tun wakes up in the hospital with a few scratches and bruises and Jane at his side. She tells him that Nate will be cremated today and her spirit should finally be at rest. This is a really sad moment because I truly felt bad for her character. All she ever did was genuinely loved Tun and he treated her pretty badly. With her remains cremated, her spirit can move on and be at peace. But this wouldn't be an Asian horror movie without a horrifyingly tragic ending now, would it? Sometime later, Jane picks up some photos for Tun and notices Nate's spirit in the pictures. She flips through the photos, which reveal Nate crawling toward the bookshelf. Jane looks behind the bookshelf and finds an envelope containing a negative photo roll. She processes the pictures, which tragically reveal Tun's friend sexually assaulting Nate inside of the science classroom. Jane realizes that Nate was leaving her clues all along so she could discover what truly happened to her. Jane confronts Tun with the photos where he finally tells her the truth about what happened. Tun walked in on his friend sexually assaulting Nate and was pressured by Tun to take pictures of her so that she wouldn't report them. Instead of defending his girlfriend like a man, Tun took the pictures and did nothing to help her. This is the event that drove Nate to take her own life and turn into a vengeful spirit in death. This explains why Tun randomly showed up in Tun's apartment looking for the photos and saying he was going to die. Nate tormented all those involved in her assault and also drove them to take their own lives. She has saved Tun for last because although he didn't physically assault her, the role he played was far worse and much more painful to her. Tun uses the excuse of being young, dumb, and broke for his lack of action, which completely disgusts Jane, who leaves the apartment. After she leaves, Tun burns all the photographs and yells out to Nate to show herself. He starts taking photos all around his apartment with a Polaroid, hoping to find her spirit. He tosses the camera in anger, which then snaps a picture of him after hitting the ground. He picks up the camera and looks at the photo, which reveals the film's brilliant and shocking twist. It is revealed that Nate's ghost has been attached to Tun the entire film. She was the cause of his neck pain and why he weighed so heavily on the scale. The young monk was staring at him because he could sense her spirit and possibly even saw her attached to him. Realizing that he will never be rid of her spirit, Tun throws himself out of the window. We see that Tun has survived the fall but is now in a catatonic state with his back slumped over inside of a mental hospital. He is visited by Jane, who cries at the sight of what he has become. In the film's final scene, we see Nate sitting on top of his shoulders. She is determined to torment him for the rest of his life, with the guilt of what he has done literally weighing on his shoulders as the movie ends. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was Shudder. My friends, I had a great time rewatching this classic Thai horror film. The film had a decent amount of effective and memorable scares throughout, although I feel that the film relied too heavily on jump scares as opposed to the more genuinely terrifying moments. Shudder still earns its solid scare score of 78%. The scariest scene in the film was when Nate was chasing Tun upside down through the dark hallway. The entire chase sequence was terrifying, but seeing her ghost walking on the ceiling was truly stuff of nightmares. Shudder played out more like a tragic drama with supernatural elements in my opinion, with a story that I really enjoyed. I definitely recommend checking out Shudder, which you can currently stream for free with ads on Vudu. But, as always, I hope you all enjoyed this video. Thank you all for tuning in, and I cannot wait to see y'all right back here in the Horror Mine. Y'all stick around.